Hi, Ashley.
I'm Premier, how are you?
Very well.
Take a seat.
Yeah.
Get a coffee?
Love one.
Right. Premier, what defines a Perrottet government?
I think doing things differently. The last 12 months there's been a lot of challenges that have come our way that we've dealt with in the here and now, but at the same time being focused on reform for the future, and housing affordability, the stamp duty reforms that I've worked on for a number of years as Treasurer to get that through the Parliament. Floods, that's something that personally impacted me. I've spent over a month of my premiership on the ground in those flood-affected communities. I think that spurred me on to make changes to get everybody back on their feet.
Some observers would say industrial action, jobs for the boys, internal instability and an old Nazi costume have defined your premiership. It hasn't been the easiest 12 months or so, has it?
Politics is not easy. It's not easy. It's difficult. There will always be external events and mistakes get made. That's part of any job, that's part of anyone's life. I haven't got everything right in the time I've been in politics, but you learn from it. You've got to constantly check yourself and reflect on the way you approach issues. I've done that over my time, and I'm sure I'll make more mistakes going forward. That's just part of any job.
On John Barilara's appointment to the trade job, initially you said he was a good pick, you said he'd do a brilliant job. Don't voters have a right to raise questions about your judgment?
Judge me on my record. I'm very proud of what I've achieved and what my government has achieved. And in relation to that period, people say it dragged on too long. You talk about defying the government, it dragged on too long. It did. It shouldn't have. But ultimately, that's because I set up an independent review process.
That fiasco raised serious questions about the integrity of government processes. You now have bushfire grants. John Barilaro, as the Deputy Premier, seems to have intervened in the process which excluded money going to Labor-held seats. Isn't that the worst of politics?
Well, I've done so much in my time as Premier in relation to sweeping reforms and integrity measures. One of the first things I did when I became Premier was do a review of grant administration, and we've changed the Ministerial Code of Conduct in relation to that.
But how is this allowed to happen in the first place? This is public money. Isn't it evidence of a culture within the government? And you were Treasurer at the time.
It's not the Treasurer's role to go through every line item of spending.
But do you acknowledge that there have been failures?
Absolutely.
Why have you had so few women sitting around the cabinet table making decisions? There's 6 out of 24.
Well, I've said we need to do better, Ash. I made it very clear that I wanted to have more women put their hands up to run. I know that our governments are better served with that diversity. Now, I think we've made some headway. I think that's good. Progress.
Not a lot.
But progress takes time.
So if you win in March, will your cabinet look quite different to what it does now in terms of the makeup? There's been a lot of discussion about your Catholic faith. The boss of Clubs New South Wales lost his job because he linked it to your drive for gambling reform. How does, if at all, your faith play into policy-making decisions?
Well, I've reflected on that the last few days, obviously. And I think I was wrong in what I said in respect of that faith doesn't have an impact on those on the way you form your views. I think it does. I think the more I've thought about it, I was wrong what I said, because I think certainly my upbringing and my faith certainly has had an impact. It developed in me a sense of social justice, looking after vulnerable people. I don't think that's something I should be ashamed of.
Why has gambling reform, poker machine reform, become such a priority for you now?
Probably goes back to when I was Treasurer, and the billions of dollars in revenue received from gambling always, and I've spoken about this in the past, always kind of stuck with me as something that we were receiving revenue and profiting off people's misery. That was wrong.
So what's left to do?
Well, we've got challenging economic times ahead, so my job is to continue to deal with the here and now, but we have an obligation to look for the future. I didn't run for Parliament just to be focused on an election. I want to set our state up for the next generation, and that's what you'll see.
Dominic Perrottet, thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.